the differential impact. What schools say and what teachers do was also interesting. So all schools and academies made statements about RE on their website. 4 had specific commitments and put their planning on their website as well. 1 didn't. All during the process, it was under construction. All of the non-denominational schools said that they were committed to delivering the locally agreed syllabus. None of them did. 2 of the pupils' schools, 2 of these schools' academies, there were false claims about what pupils would encounter. And that was really funny, because I said to one teacher about making visits in year 8 to local places of worship. And what was really interesting, he said, we don't do that. I said, you do? He said, no, I don't. I said, where have you found that out? It's on your website. I said, no, it isn't. So I said, look on your website. Look, he said, I've never seen that, and I've been here longer than the website. And what was particularly interesting in one of the non-denominational school was that there were 2 parallel lines for RE. What the school did, and what the assistant head non-specialist teachers did, and then what the head of RE did with the specialist NQT, which was different. They had 2 parallel Key Stage 3 curriculums running. But the head of RE was fairly new in post, wouldn't tell the assistant head that that was going on because they were worried that it would be stopped. So there's an interesting amount of duplicity going on in that particular school. And trustees, governors and SLT did not check the relationship between what was said and what was done, even in non-denominational schools and academies. It was presumed that what was on the website was what was happening. Nobody checked, and they got nobody in to check, which was really interesting. And finally, because I am aware of your time and there's time for questions and such the like, I think what was really interesting is in the research, teachers made planning justifications on the basis of what they imagined would be important for pupils in the place where they lived and the lives that they were going to live. So one of the things that came out really strongly right across all the teachers, they imagined what their pupils either were like at the moment or were going to be in the future, and they thought RE needed to meet the needs of the lives of these pupils. But, and this was really important, only 1 teacher lived in the catchment area of their school, and only 1 teacher, but not the same, had any in-depth knowledge about the lives and communities that their pupils came from. And that really was interesting. And a really good example was the non-specialist RE teacher from a white non-religious background, who made claims about their pupils not having religion because their pupils were like him. But they needed to know about Muslims because they'd meet Muslims and Hindus in the future. That was what what his general narrative was. And I asked him about the churches and places of worship, other places of worship in the vicinity of the school, because I thought this thing. And he said, well, I said, I know there's a Baptist church, and I think there's an Anglican parish church, and there's a mosque and there's a mandir in the nearest local town, but I don't think there's anything else. And yet, if you walked out of the school and turned left and walked right, there was a large Greek Orthodox church where nearly 7% of the children from that school actually went on a regular basis because they were from Greek, Romanian, Russian, and other East European backgrounds. It was just absolutely fascinating. But I think part of the problem was, if you imagine what your pupils' lives are going to be like, and you imagine actually their lives are going to be like your life in some way, that means that you teach what your priorities are, not necessarily what they're going to encounter in the lives that they have. And for me, that came out as really, really fascinating. And therefore, I think for all of the teachers in this study, curriculum was a matter of imagination. It was about, how do you construct what is important in your subject for those pupils, taking them into their future life? But there's not necessarily correlation between the experiences of pupils and the experience of teachers, which I found really, really fascinating. I'm more than happy to talk about the theoretical prism. I did this through, you might absolutely be thrilled by that or totally turned off by that, but I can do other conversations and questions. Anyway, that's a really whistle-stop tour, given I appreciate that we only probably have about 35 minutes. And I'd like to fit something else in right at the end, if I may. Is that all right, Ed?
Thanks, David. That's great. So I know when we chatted about this, I mean, that last point you came on to there, was one of the things that stuck in my mind from our previous conversation, that actually the majority of those teachers didn't really have any direct understanding of their pupils' lives or their communities. And I don't know if that's true for the people on this call. I'm looking around at people thinking, well, I guess most of us would be a bit shocked by that you wouldn't know much about your local community.
Could I just say one thing, though? If you take Richard Maddox, it's a very dodgy character altogether. When Richard and I were young and foolish, we both taught at the Deeping School in Lincolnshire. I lived 6 minutes walk from the school. You didn't live very far away, did you, Richard?
No, I was, yeah, just a few minutes bike ride, yeah.
Yeah, so we lived in those communities. And I remember things like, I remember Leanne from up the road, year 7, knocking on my door at 7 o'clock one morning, asking me if I'd carry her eggs to school for her, because she had DT cooking and she didn't want to drop them on the way. It was only a 6 minute walk. And I said, no, I won't, Leanne. Yeah. I think that of all these teachers, only one lived within the catchment area, but purposefully, the other 4 didn't. And they all lived at least 5 miles away from the school, others in different London boroughs or just a long way away from the school. And one of the teachers summed it up really interesting. He said, what I don't want is I don't want to be in the supermarket with my wife and child and to see my pupils. Now, I think that's quite interesting. Now, I think that's a change that's happened over time, over a 40-year period, that more and more teachers have lived further away from their schools than closer, but that might not represent the teachers here. I agree.
So we've got another about 20 minutes, 25 minutes. We'll finish about 10 past 5. Just from summing this up now, we've had a lot of focus on GCSE over the last 5 years. And I think that Key Stage 3 has been quite neglected in a lot of schools. From what you've looked at and your in-depth exploration of these schools, if you were in a school, what are your tips about how to plan Key Stage 3? What are you looking for?
Well, I think there are a number of things. I think firstly, to use Ofsted language, is what's your curriculum intent? What really are you aiming at? And what will be challenging? What do you think will be a challenge for you and your pupils at the end of Key Stage 3, which is different to getting them ready for GCSE? Because some may not do GCSE, and we do know that in many schools, other than GCSE, sometimes there's no RS or RE at Key Stage 4. So I do think is what's your curriculum intent and what are you aiming to do? And then the question comes is, how are you doing from year 7 through to the end of year 9 or through to the end of year 8? How are you scaffolding that in such a way that you're moving them toward that aim progressively? It's what, what's his name? Raymond Holly referred to as aims and stage aims. So your overall aim is this. What are the stages that you need on the way, and how's that contributing? And how are you taking them on a curriculum journey, which is becoming progressively more challenging over time? And how does it fit into as a whole, which I think is really important. Not related to this research, but another piece of research I did some time ago around curriculum planning showed that if you look, and this was discussions with year 8 pupils particularly, and also some year 10 pupils, year 8 and 10, in a number of schools across the Southwest. When you ask them at the end of the year, this was where the year 10, they weren't doing GCSE. When you ask them at the end of a year what they'd done in RE, they found it very difficult to piece together a narrative. And what they did is what I would sometimes refer to as lily pond curriculum. What they do is they jump from they start at the end of, they start in year 7, and they start jumping onto really interesting lily pads. And they get to the end of year 8, and they know they've got there. But when they look back, they can't identify the journey that they've been on. And very often what they did is they conflated things that were generally religious with RE. So one of the year 10 kids, I remember saying, oh, I remember doing quite a lot about Gandhi. Gandhi were really interesting. And I said, oh, that's it. Because I'd looked at their curriculum plans. I said, that's interesting. I said, are you doing history? I said, yes. I said, didn't you do Gandhi in here? Oh, you did? Yeah, we didn't do it in RE. We did it in history. But because Gandhi was generally religious, they automatically conflated that with RE in their school, which in their school wasn't true. So I think knowing what you're actually aiming to achieve in RE, what do you want pupils to know and understand? What do you want them to be able to do? What do you want them to be able to talk about by the end of this period of time? How does that build into a whole pattern of curriculum over a 2 to 3 year period? I think the other thing as well, I would say, and I know this may sound as heresy, so I do apologize if it offends anybody. I used to give the example, I do give the example working with schools about GCSE business studies. Now, nobody in any school ever come across has really done business studies at Key Stage 3. Well, when they start it at Key Stage 4, business studies teachers don't start by saying, right, you haven't done any in Key Stage 1, 2, or 3. So we're going to do that first before we get into doing GCSE business studies. What they do is they start exactly where they want them to be. And I think what we've done in RE very often, and not just RE, but RE particularly, is we've sort of imagined what they haven't had and then started to backfill to get them to where we want them to be before we can then start doing what we want them to do. By which time it's too late to get them doing what we want them to do because we don't have enough time. Therefore, I think actually starting with high levels of expectation. And if they don't know it, well, actually, we will expect them to learn it really, really quickly. Because you would in another subject area, you wouldn't not do that in RE. And I think for me, that's also, you know, where we start is as important as where we end. And I think that's really, really important. And the interesting thing that came up from Barbara's research, the impact of agreed syllabuses on teaching and learning in RE, was that very often Key Stage 3 looked more like Key Stage 2. Partly because, and this came out in research that I did on the impact of teachers' academic backgrounds in RE, which was a year-long piece of research, was that sometimes teachers in RE didn't want RE at Key Stage 3 to be challenging. They wanted it to be fun. And they wanted it to be fun because there was a presumption that RE itself was not going to be popular. And if you made it hard, you would turn kids off. And what was interesting is research that we did with pupils showed that that wasn't the case, that they did enjoy it and it was fun, but they didn't find it challenging. And one of the impacts of that sort of policy in schools was where you had full course GCSE, the brightest pupils wouldn't opt to do it because it wasn't felt to be challenging enough. So what you did is you had really popular RE at Key Stage 3. You then got GCSE groups which were really popular, but they were populated by those pupils who didn't want to be challenged. And therefore, they didn't go on and get A stars and A's at the time. Showing my age here, not talking in numbers. And for me, that was really, really interesting. So I think in terms of, you know, what do you want to achieve? How are you going to structure that effectively? But also knowing at what level you're going to get them to jump in the pool. And not to make it really sort of, I'm not saying fun can't be good, but that's not what our starting point should be.
David, that's really, really helpful, really interesting. I've got a question in the chat from Andrew. And please do, other people on this call now, let's put your questions to David, either verbally, just wave, or pop them in the chat. I think, I don't know how many of you are really happy with your Key Stage 3 curriculum. I think, you know, if you've been thinking about, I know, you know, there are, so, you know, if you've got areas questions that you would like to ask David, please, or get other people on this call to answer. We've got a lot of experience here. I know, David, I've heard you talking before about this idea of a story through your curriculum, and you've referred to that as opposed to a lily pad where, you know, which isn't, you know, what's the story that your Key Stage 3 RE is telling? But I've got a question from Andrew. He says, is the RE community suffering from a lack of national coordination? Yeah,
particularly that's been led by Ed Pawson. Terrible, awful. Actually, Andrew, I think that's a really interesting question. It's an interesting question on two levels, because one of the things that did come up in the research, because this was done when the core report was being developed. And actually, right at the end, I went back and looked at the core report with all of them. And what was interesting was that only one teacher, and that was the Irish teacher, felt that the core report and nationally determined RE would be a good thing. Because the other said, well, even if it was nationally determined, I'll probably still, well, what they were saying was, I think what we're doing is what they're already asking for. And that I found really interesting. So I think it would depend. I think if there was a national curriculum for RE, which was actually monitored by Ofsted, and there were repercussions to that, like they have done with RSA, or RSE rather, not RSA, RSE, then I think it probably would have an impact. How long that impact will be, I don't know. But I think that the greatest problem probably from my research, or issue from my research, is where you have schools where you have planning for teachers and not planning for pupils, where you have high levels of non-specialists, and what you have to do. We know from the NATRE reports that increasingly RE is taught by non-specialists in secondary schools. And it's not saying that some non-specialists aren't very good, don't get me wrong. It's when you've got a breadth of non-specialist teaching, and what you're doing is trying to keep your teachers on board, as opposed to challenging pupils, because in the end you have to work with those teachers. So for me, I think the greatest challenge is non-specialists. But I do think, I think when Gove's sort of said, well, RE can look after itself, that had a really negative impact. So I think having political direction on it would be really good and really useful.
Thank you for that, David.
Do you want to follow that up, Andrew?
No, not really. I'm just, you know, thank you very much, David, and thank you for all the interesting ideas that you brought today.
Okay, so there's a question from Angela now about knowledge organisers. Angela, do you want to express that? What's your sense about that, or what's your practice?
Yeah, so at the moment, our school, probably the last 18 months, has had a big drive on knowledge organisers. And as heads, we've been asked to really start with planning the knowledge organisers first, in terms of breaking down each term what the content is and the key aspects that we want to make sure we build into each term. And so I just wanted to know, really, from David's research, did that come up in your research? Is that good practice? I kind of feel as though I'm having to almost start at the beginning rather than looking at the end point with this.
Well, Thank you for that, Angela. I think it's a really important question. What I would say is that this particular drive for knowledge was starting to make an impact in the schools where I was researching. But what I would say is what's, I think, really important is knowledge for what purpose. So unless you know actually what you want them to achieve by the end, just putting knowledge in won't actually help that at all. Because I think that one of the issues around RE is there is so much to know. Is where do you start? And how do you prioritize some knowledge over others? I think is really interesting. And one of the things that came out was particularly where schools had focused very narrowly on knowledge, and that was the one school particularly with GCSE RE starting from year 7 effectively. And one of the Church of England schools where there was a very strong drive to have Christianity taught in a very particular way going through the school, was that the instinct of RE teachers was to make it broader because they didn't want to leave people out. So in the Church of England school, so we don't do anything on Hinduism or Buddhism. So I've just put a half term in on Hinduism, Buddhism and Sikhism. Well, the question is, well, so what? I mean, my question is, so what? So I think that knowledge is important. And I know the work of Michael Young and Daisy Christodoulou and those, I think is really interesting. And Richard Quay's work as well, before he became HMI, on the role and place of knowledge in RE, I think is really important, significant, because it is about, you know, getting people to know hard things, but for what purpose? And I think what we tend to do is, if we're not careful, is we have no organizing principle. And I think quite interestingly, and I'll use something that did come out in the research, which was quite fascinating for me, was talking to somebody who was teaching RE, who was a science head of science as well. And she said to me, I'm teaching RE, I'm head of science there, and I find it really interesting because one of the things I find is we all know that the physics bit of science at Key Stage 3 is harder than the biology bit. Biology is dead easy. Physics is really hard. But because we work in a rotational system, some kids get the really hard stuff early and work onto the really easy stuff. And some gets the really easy stuff and work onto that stuff. It's a real curriculum conundrum for me. And I understand that problem. But I do think that knowing what you're trying to achieve and fitting and showing how the knowledge helps you to pupils to achieve that is more important than actually just arbitrarily throwing knowledge in there. I mean, I know, and Andrew and Richard and Hazel, I'm not so sure about Ian because I've always had my thoughts about Ian, was that we all realize the importance of the homoousios clause in the Nicene Creed. And we also understand the importance of the filioque clause and how it caused massive divisions in the 11th century in Christianity. And we all believe that pupils should learn about the homoousios from an Athanasian principle and about the filioque clause in terms of modern interdenominational relationships. But where do we pop it into our curriculum? Because actually, if you don't know what you're trying to achieve by putting that in, what's the point in having it in? That's all I would say. And I don't think that that's been articulated well enough by people who are actually promoting the knowledge model.
So Hazel, you've got your hand up, and then I've got a question from Claire as well about diverse knowledge backgrounds of pupils coming in.
It's brilliant stuff to try and take in and to get you thinking. That David has said that he thinks that the biggest issue is non-specialist teachers. I would say that the two big shifts that have happened in GCSE, i.e. the standards have gone up, grade 9, and also the shift to knowledge and understanding, you know, beliefs and practices, have had an impact. I think the best impact on Key Stage 3, because to me, or to us at St Peter's, that both the standards have gone up at Key Stage 3, and also the depth of knowledge and understanding of different religions has also gone up, which was always my issue with Key Stage 3, that it was too whiffly, waffly, broad, and not deep and deep into each religion. And from that, I have felt that there is an opportunity, I think, for Key Stage 3 in a Church of England school. The understanding Christianity stuff has really helped in the deepening of the knowledge and understanding of Christianity, that unless you're a Christian teacher, you won't have or know or be able to get across. So that has been important, and also important to me, but then as is important to me throughout the curriculum, and definitely at Key Stage 3, is to very quickly bring in or currently have Zooms with the local believers to enrich and enlarge and deepen and strengthen students' understanding of different religions. The work with the local community in terms of trips and visits and whatever kind of enrichment, to me, is really important, or else you could be going down a rabbit hole without realizing it.
I think what you say is really important in terms of understanding the diversity of local communities. I think one of the awful things that RE has done is promoted what has sometimes been called dominant discourse religion. So we talk about religions as sort of disembodied traditions, which are coherent and understandable. And actually, when you get down onto the ground, they're just not.
Correct.
So I think how we get pupils to realize that, I know Bob Jackson and Eleanor Nesbitt and others at Warwick have worked very hard on this, how we get down to demotic discourse and how we get pupils to understand the complexity of lived religious life and worldviews that's coming up in the report that's come out from Theos and other places, I think is really important. So thank you for that contribution.
And that religions are changing by the minute, and are very alive and very culturally aware, and very much moving. And of course the impact, I mean, there's plenty to study in the impact of lockdown to religions and how they've practiced and how they've reflected on what's important. And so I mean, they're never static, always moving, always changing.
It's true. Claire, can I come on to your question? Okay. Now, Claire, I'm really glad what you can't do is slap me from where you are. I'm going to say something now, and it's not to do with secondary particularly, but I was sitting in a school on Bodmin Moor. It's very dangerous. It was a primary school. And I was doing an RE inset for all of the teachers in the school, all 4 of them. It was a tiny school. And this teacher, the only male teacher in the school, said to me, well, can't do RE around here because our kids, our kids know nothing about all these other weird religions. And he said, and they're never going to meet them. It's Bodmin Moor, for God's sake. What do they need to know about Sikhs for? And I absolutely agreed with him. I think you're absolutely right. I said, this is your classroom, isn't it? I said, yeah, it is. It's a lovely classroom. I said, yeah. I said, see, you've done this fantastic work. All your kids have done this absolutely fantastic work on the ancient Egyptians. I said, yeah, it's good, isn't it? I said, yeah, it's really good. I said, how many of your kids have met an ancient Egyptian? How many of your kids are likely to go to Egypt? How many of your kids are likely to meet in it? I mean, they might still be wandering around Bodmin Moor. I mean, I don't know if you've been up there, Claire. I know Liscard is just on the fringe there. But you get up there, it's a day, you don't know what you're going to find. Simon Reeves has been up on Bodmin Moor, so you get some really weird folk up there, I tell you. God love him. I think that's a premise that we ought to park. What we don't do is when I used to teach history or geography, I don't start from the premise that my children have had no experience of a volcano, so how can I teach about volcanoes? And I think that's where I'm saying we need to start exactly where we want them to be. And say, you may never have heard of this before, but this is really exciting and interesting. Otherwise, what we do is we constantly second guess ourselves into a position where we find it really difficult to start anywhere. And I think as well, I mean, it is really, I think what's really interesting, we did, when I was at, and this is published research for Cornwall SACRE, Cornwall Agreed Syllabus Conference actually from donkey's years ago. We asked teachers in secondary schools what pupils really like learning. And what they said was they really like doing the sort of the philosophy, the ethics and the what have you. So what we did is we surveyed and then interviewed some of the pupils who were surveyed in Key Stage 3 and 4 about what they really enjoyed learning about in RE. And the philosophy and ethics never came up except for as negatives. They said, oh, we're fed up a lot. Oh, no, we just want to learn something. And that was really interesting for us. And it came as a real shock to the secondary teachers who were involved in the writing of the syllabus at that time, that we make presumptions about pupils, what they like or don't like. I think we just need to start where we want them to be, irrespective of their experience. Because in another subject area, you wouldn't say, well, you know, these kids are from Liskeard, so they've never been to a desert, so we can't teach about deserts. We just wouldn't do it. You know what I mean? That's why I'm saying I'm glad you can't slap me because you think I might be being
Claire, do you want to come back on any of that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just thinking we're planning Sikhism into our scheme of work at Key Stage 3, but some of them will have studied Sikhism at Key Stage 2, Key Stage 1. Some of them might have done Hinduism, some of them might have done Buddhism. You know, what I don't want to be doing is we start at the basics and, you know, start with really low expectations of trying to teach them the basics. But equally, if you go into high, they don't have that sort of foundational knowledge to understand why the Langar kitchen is so important for Sikhs, because they don't know about the community and the gurus and the way in which the religions sort of got that history and lived experience for them. So how do we best pitch it to have those high expectations, but also be aware that some will have some knowledge, some will have no knowledge?
Well, I think one of the things that you can do is start with pupils. You know, you can ask pupils who knows anything about Sikhism and see where they are. But what you don't want to do is go back into sort of nice stories about Guru Nanak. Unless what you're going to do is look at stories of Guru Nanak through a really critical eye and asking what was the socio-economic, political, religious context in which he was working? Why was this important? So if you're doing Sikhism in that sense, but the other thing is, are you looking at Sikhism and or are you looking at Sikhs? So what I've done is I popped in the chat the British Sikh Report link, which, and that's the takes to the 8 years now they've been in this thing called the British Sikh Report. It's got better every year. And one of the things that they're looking at here in the 2020 report, which was launched last night, was about features of the Sikh community, and they focus it around a particular thing. This year they focus it around organ donation.
Okay.
So what you're getting there is really good statistical, good sociological information about British Sikh communities at the moment. So what's important for them and why.
Okay.
So that's another place to start. So it's not saying that you can't do stuff, but what you don't want to be doing is sort of like the Cook's tour.
Yeah.
Of, you know, let's start. I mean, one of the interesting things is the schools who do Buddhism at Key Stage 3, who decide to teach the story of the Buddha, and they teach it like the clear vision stuff, which Key Stage 3 is much more like Key Stage 2 should be. But anyway, they do the life of the Buddha. And because they never get to the end of the life of the Buddha, effectively, because they run out of time because there's so much to do, that they then don't get onto the really difficult, really challenging, really good stuff about Sikhism, about Buddhism. You know, how can you talk about nothingness? How do you make sense of that? You know, how do you work with four-term logic? How do you do that? You know, what is, what is, what isn't, what could have been, what could not have been. Four-term logic in the nature of being. You know, and actually it's that which really intellectually stimulating and really move kids forward. One of the things that we did find in the research that I did previously, but not this piece of research, was that very often at Key Stage 3, non-Christian religions were actually taught in a much more challenging way intellectually than Christianity. And that I found, and the, oh, I can't remember her name, but if I do remember it, I'll let Ed know. But there was a report done at Warwick looking at the teaching of Christianity at Key Stage 3 and compared it with the teaching of other religions. It was quite shocking, really. And that was a national survey. So I think, again, what level do you want to start them at? What's the intellectual challenge that you're going to present them with in what you're doing? And where does teaching about Sikhism fit in what you want them to learn overall, I think is really important.
So we've been moving more towards focusing on inquiry questions for topics. So would you think that that's a better way to sort of, as a way in, to start with our knowledge, what we want them to learn, you know, as an intent, really?
Yeah, I think so. As long as that inquiry is well structured and is well scaffolded in terms of the expectations that you want them to reach by the end. And also, how does that fit into a coherent pattern of knowledge and understanding and skills as they develop through Key Stage 3?
Okay.
And what is the high quality things that they would need to know? Because, you know, I mean, one of the things I often say is that, you know, the idea that knowledge is transformative is true and not true. I mean, the more I know about my sister, the less I like her, to be honest. So I think we need to be careful about how we construct what we're doing.
Dave, we need to wrap up really, but I mean, we're starting to get on some very interesting ground here. I mean, I really agree with you about. I think your example of the Buddhism and Sikhism are interesting here, because I really do want to tell some stories actually to these students, and actually stories about Guru Nanak and the Buddha I think are really vital. But I do also agree with you that if those stories are dealt with in a low-level way, actually, how are we advancing the learning of pupils? Because actually, so we've got some, so I like your site there, the Sikhism site, because it takes us to, and I like what Claire's just said about inquiry questions as well. I think I do just want to plea though, not to forget story, because I think that we marginalize story in RE and we suck the life out of these things, and we end up with RE through proof texts and through a narrow window, which actually isn't an authentic way of understanding religion.
Absolutely. Can I just come on, because I know we've got to go, and I've got to go because I've got something else to do before 6 o'clock when I knock off. I'll just put into the chat a link. What we're doing at the Interfaith Network is we are doing some resources for secondary schools about learning about interfaith engagement in the UK. We did a series for primary school last year, and I put the link in there so you can look at the primary resources, and we're going to base them around the same sort of format, but aim at Key Stage 3. What we'd like is for teachers to look at these and perhaps trial them. We're not looking to publish them till late February, so there's the sort of time to do that. Would you be happy, you don't have to sign up now, but would you be happy to be involved in looking at these and giving comment on these as we're developing them? And I can do that through Ed's Goods officers. Is that okay?
So what I'll do is, David, I'll send your PowerPoint out if that's okay. If you send it to me, and I'll send a few notes out from this meeting, and I'll put any questions you want to or links that you want and your email address in that, and then people can respond to you directly if they'd like to be involved.
Absolutely.
Brilliant.
No problem at all.
Cool. Well, look, David, thank you so much for this evening. I think I found that research was fascinating, and I think, you know, I just, when you told me about that a couple of months ago, we were chatting about something else, and it just seemed to me that research really, although it's very in a lot of depth, it also embodies some really interesting conclusions really about, well, what are we teaching for? And I think your comments particularly that stick in my mind are people's very diverse reasons for teaching RE, some of which, as you say, were not anywhere on their curriculum planning, but were to do with other interests that they had. And actually, it really reminds me that, you know, we come to teaching from very different perspectives, and, you know, we need to be, you know, we're not often, I think your comment about not having much training in planning, curriculum planning, is interesting. You know, we ought to perhaps put on a session which is more specific. Look, actually, what is curriculum planning? Because I'm not sure that many of us have ever really followed that through very carefully, rather than just being, you know, lily padding in the way that we plan. But that's all really helpful, and I will send all that material out, and people can get in touch with if they want to follow that up, because I know those primary resources are really helpful. So it'd be fantastic to have some secondary versions.
No problem at all. And can I say thank you very much for being so kind. It's lovely to meet you and to see some faces I haven't seen for donkey's years. How's Jack? How's Scrumpy?
Jack's doctor in Edinburgh now, medical doctor.
God, who'd have thought? Thank God he didn't take after his father.
Yeah.
Oh, that's brilliant. Give him my love. He won't remember me. But it's great to see people I haven't seen for ages, and also to meet new faces as well. It's been really lovely.
Well, thanks, David.
Can I just add, put up your hand if you suffer from insomnia? Because I can send the whole thesis for people to read. I guarantee it is the best antidote to insomnia I've ever come across. 80,000 words of it.
Cool. Well, great. Thank you, David, for sharing with us this evening, and thanks everybody, and keep in touch.
Thank you.
You too.
Thanks, David.
Thank
Thanks,
you all.
Ed. Rock
Wish
on.
you all
Fantastic.
ready.
Bye.
Thank you.
Okay, bye.
Thanks, David. That was great.
That was great. Cheers. And lovely to see you again, Richard. And is that your daughter, did you say?
I beg pardon?
It's
like working with my dad.
Kylie, your daughter.
What,
Not his
what's he like to work with, Kylie?
No, I'm going to cut off now. Sorry, you're breaking up. You're breaking up.
See you,
I'm so
Richard.
sorry.
He's
God
wonderful.
bless. Bye-bye now.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
bye.
Cheerio.
Oh dear.
Cool. Thank you. That was great.
all right.
I think that was a really good mix. I think, you know, research. Let's just actually think about what research is. Let's think about following something in detail, and that, you know, your 5 teachers and your observations, and then actually then coming out of that, and that I was hoping that we'd get to some more generic sort of ideas, which I think they will find very useful to go away with.
Brilliant.
Cool.
I'm glad. And I'll see that stuff. And thanks for the invite as well. But it was really good. It's always good to see. It's funny seeing Richard, because I said Richard was my NQT.
That's great.
And I remember when he got pneumonia, he was off for about 3 months.
No.
That was awful in his second year.
He's a star, Richard. He really is.
I love Richard to bits. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool.
Yes.
Well, good to have you with us, David. Thank you. Have a good evening.
Have you enjoy your tea?
I will do. See you
God
later.
bless. Cheers. Bye.